Hello, Mitesh here, and welcome to part 3 of getting started with Azure Infrastructure as Code. In this section, we'll look at how do we secure our code and scripts by using passwords and secrets stored inside the Azure Key Vault. If you find the content here useful in any of these courses, then please do comment, like, share, subscribe. Thanks very much. So we'll start at looking at the Azure Key Vault access permissions, the policies, the access policies. So what policies do we need for the users and for ARM deployment itself? And then we'll look at how do we reference the Key Vault and the secret inside an ARM template. We'll also take a look at the secure string data type and see that in action as well. So in this diagram, we can see on the top right, we can see our Visual Studio Code editor and the little box going into it. So what we're saying in here is we're going to reference the secret in our parameter files rather than putting in a password or waiting for the editor to ask us what the password is when we run it. We're going to just point to the password, and the password is going to actually live inside the Azure Key Vault down here. So we've got to make sure that whoever's running the code, whether you're running it interactively as a user or via DevOps, so if you run it via DevOps, you've got using a service principal, which we'll get onto in the next section. You've got to make sure they have access to this Key Vault and to the secret inside it. Okay, so when we reference the secret, the deployment service will go and retrieve that secret from the Key Vault, and then use that secret inside the platform to go and build your objects, and all of that can then be done without having to specify any secrets and passwords in your actual code. Okay, and in order to do that, you've got to make sure you've got access first. So even if you're an owner of a subscription, somebody else goes and creates a Key Vault, you don't automatically get access to that Key Vault. So that's one thing to remember. Another thing is that you want to make sure the Azure Resource Manager for template deployment is selected. So that's for when you're doing ARM template deployments, it's got to be able to access the Key Vault. So it can't do that unless that's ticked. And if you're running it interactively as a user, then your user account will need to have access to the secret as well. On here, we mention if using the service principal, you need to also add access to that service principal. Again, we'll show you that in the next section. And if you're doing that, you also need to make sure the resource group has got a particular type of access as well. And obviously the Key Vault, the key and the secret must exist as well. All right, so here's just an example of the reference that we use. So in our parameter file for our admin password here, instead of having a password written in here, what we're saying is, okay, go to this Key Vault here, enter your subscription ID, the name of your resource group up here, and the Key Vault name, and tell it the secret name. So that's not the actual password, that's just the name of the container or the key that holds the password. Now, if you look inside the Key Vault here, you'll see the Key Vault is there. In here, we have a bunch of secrets. In this case, we've just got the one. And the secret name is SQL password. So if you clicked onto that, you'll be able to see the password inside there. So we'll show you that as well. If I go to the portal here, you'll see here's our Key Vault. And inside that Key Vault, we'll see the access policies. And then we can look at our secret. So that Key Vault's got to exist. It's got to have the secret here. So this is the key it will look for, something called SQL password. And it will always get the current version, unless we specify an older version if we need to do that. So we can go into there. Now we've got access so we can see this. If I click show secret value, it will show up in there. But we're not going to do it in the portal. So we're going to do it by code. So what we need to do, is there anything else that we need to show you in here? Just remember this checkbox here. So we are doing a Azure template deployment. So we need to make sure that box is ticked as per the PowerPoint. So we'll do, let's go into the code now. So if we look at the template here, so SQL with a database Inside this one, we'll see we've got a bunch of parameters, including administrator login and SQL password. And you'll also notice this is a secure string, and we'll see the result of that shortly. And then if we scroll down a bit, there's also a new option here, so a new type of parameter, which is a boolean, so that can be set as true as false. So I've got an option here in my parameter file that says, do you want to build the database or not? And if that's set to true, it will go and build it. If I set it to false in the parameter file, which we'll look at in a second, it won't build the database. So that's a good way to control which objects and resources get built or not. So if you've got a large template with lots of different objects, you may want to use a condition for that, and I'll show you what that looks like. So at the moment, we've got our resources here. So that's our SQL Server. And in there, it's going to use the parameters, and we can see here, for the password, we're using the parameter SQL admin password. Okay. That SQL Server object has got some child resources, so we've got a couple of firewall rules. These are just the defaults for now. And we'll notice another resource here, which is the database. Now, here's the condition. So if we add this line here, condition, it goes and check if a value's true. So if we're using a boolean, it'll check if this is true. So our parameter build database, it will check if that's true or false, and then it will go and build whatever is defined in here. Okay, and it's also got a dependency. So this is one of the key things about these templates. So when the resource manager goes and reads this template, it knows which order to go and create stuff. So if we say, okay, this depends on the SQL Server of the name that we've given it, it will check if that exists first. If it doesn't, it will go and create the SQL Server first, and then it will come and deploy this object here. Okay, and that's about it for that section. So if we look at the parameter file, we'll be able to see the server name. I've just put a random value in there. I've given it a login name. Again, you could put this in from the Key Vault as well. And here we can see our password. So we've got a reference instead of a value like this one. We've got a reference here to say, okay, instead, we're not going to give you the value, but we're going to tell you where to go and get it from. So in here we can have our Key Vault ID, which is the full name of the Key Vault. So subscription, resource group name, and Key Vault name is there. And which key do we want to look for? The key that says it's called SQL password. And we've got our build database boolean value set to true here. So yes, we want you to go and build that database. So just before I do that, I'll show you where that resource ID is. So if you look inside here, so this is the Key Vault properties, and look at the properties of that, and you can see the full resource ID here. Again, you'll get that for most, if not all, objects. Another way to do it is you could concatenate those things as well. So you could just pass in subscription ID and a resource group name, for example, and you can concatenate and put it together if you want to. So in this template, we didn't have the output section in here, so we're going to need to add it in. So the first thing we need to do is figure out exactly where it goes. So if we go up to resources, so that's one section, and we want the next section. Let's find out where this resource section ends. So if we click on that square bracket, you'll see that's kind of highlighted there. And if we scroll down, we'll see, okay, that's the end of that section. So we could do a comma. Actually, we just go down there and just type output and then colon. Sorry, we do need a comma. Output colon and put the curly brackets in and go with that. Is it outputs? Outputs, okay. And then now we can specify an output that we want, and we could use the snippet thing again. So if we just do output tab, and then it's got what do we want to call it? We can just leave it that for now, and then a value. So we could use a value that we want to specify in our outputs. For our value, again, if we want to use a variable or something, we could use a concat. Let's do concat variables. I don't know. Let's just do database collation for now. Or if we look up here, we might be able to put something a bit more useful. So we've got this resource ID here for our SQL Server. Let's try that one. So again, let's look at the end of that one. So let's call that collation. And this one, we'll add another one. output, and we'll call that SQL Server Resource ID. Let's just copy that into there, and that should give us the resource ID of the SQL Server. Right, so let's save that and go back to our PowerShell. And now this time we're going to do with database, and make sure we've got the right template files here. So if we're not sure, we can always just go right click, copy path, just double check that. Yep, it should be correct. And then the parameter file is here, copy path again, just to double check. Okay, and then we can just run that as we did previously. Now, this will take a second because it's SQL Server, it takes a little while, so I'll just pause it. Okay, so that's now completed, and we can see our output here, so the parameters we passed in. And notice that this here, the secure string, that's actually hidden away, so it's not printed out in any log files or any logs anywhere. So that's one of the reasons that we use secure string, so nobody can go around poking around log files anywhere in any system and then start pulling out passwords. So that's why we want to make use of that where we can. And here we have the outputs that we added in the top of our template. So if we go in there and look at these outputs, I did collation and the SQL Server resource ID, and we can see those printed out here for us. Now we could potentially feed this template into another template, and I'll be able to take these outputs and do something with those, for example. Okay, so let's just see if we can connect. I've just fired up SQL Server Management Studio in here. But what we can do is just, let's see the object first and the database if it's been created. So there we go. There's our SQL Server and our database deployed via our script. So now what I can do is I'm not in a private Azure network or anything. So I'm actually on the internet. So I'm just going to, just for this example, I'm just going to put my IP in here. Save that. Just to show the password and stuff working. So if I go, so what we're going to need first is we're going to need the URL of the database server. So if I click on that, go into here, click connect, go in there. Let's just use a SQL login in this case. If I go back to my template parameter, what was my login? It was SQL admin. And then our password, now we don't know the password because we've stored it in the vault. So what I can do, go into here without having to actually read what it actually is, I can just copy and paste it from here. So I've got a SQL password key, go to the latest version, copy that into my clipboard, paste that in there, and hopefully, cool, yeah, so that's lets us in. And we can see how we've managed to connect. So we've built the SQL Server all via code. We've created an empty database. We've stored a password in a key vault, and we've referenced that through there. So the whole time we've not typed in any passwords into any template files, and we've also hidden the secure string as well. So the last thing, if we want to check, we can look at the deployment. The resource group, look at the deployment there, our last deployment here. If we look at inputs, and you'll see the same thing there, so our password is not displayed. If we look at the outputs, we'll see our two outputs that we specified in the end of the template file. So that's kind of how we secure passwords from our code base. So hopefully you found that useful, and we'll see you in the next one. Thank you.